I've been with RPA 15 years
Yeah.
or so. It's a long time.
Absolutely.
And the Regional Plan Association of New York
Mhm.
is something very different
Yeah.
than any other regional planning organization in the world, I think.
I think so too.
And you've been to Australia, so you
Yep.
know Australia, you know the conditions we have there. What is the regional plan of New York?
Sure. It's an interesting, almost a century ago, in the 1920s, a group of business leaders, private citizens, former public officials, former Manhattan borough presidents, and other people who had been involved in running the city, came together to form a committee on the regional plan. And they had this understanding that to think of the entire metropolitan region meant that they had to think beyond the 5 boroughs of New York City, that what happened in Long Island, what happened in southwestern Connecticut, the Hudson Valley in northern New Jersey, would all impact and play a major role in the success or failure of New York City. And that when you think regionally, you're thinking long-term, which is beyond political timeframes, and you're thinking of a wider geography, which is beyond political boundaries.
Mhm.
And so they established this remarkable institution, the Regional Plan Association, to think about these issues on a long-term basis. And once every generation, we would create a plan. That's why we are the
Does
region.
generation mean a decade? or
It
more?
means 25 to 30 years.
25 to 30 years. So you have 25 to 30-year plans.
Right. In fact, the truth is the distance between the first and second plans was about 40 years. The distance between the second and third plans was about 30 years. And we're now 20 years out and working on the fourth regional plan. And so you could say that the time frame is contracting and getting shorter between them. But in many ways, I think that's because issues are moving so much more rapidly.
So what's in these plans? What was in the first plan?
So the first plan is a remarkable document. It had a series of volumes studying everything from technology and land use, incredible surveys, predictions on the future growth, population, and economic of the region. But then the definitive thing about it is that there were 2 volumes that laid out very specific recommendations that said, here's where the highway should be built. We should build a circumferential highway system instead of a radial highway system because we don't want all these cars coming into the center of the region. We like a radial transit system because it delivers people to the core of the region, but what we want with traffic is to get it around. And so building the Verrazano Bridge and the Tappan Zee Bridge and the 287 core loop around the region. In fact, the George Washington Bridge was originally going to be built by the Port Authority at 57th Street, bringing all those trucks and cars from New Jersey
Center of the city.
right into the new central business district. And also, of course, the point was the RPA planners went to the Port Authority, this was in the 1920s, and said, wait a second, this bridge is also going to be connecting the mid-Atlantic region to New England. And you don't want all that traffic coming right through your CBD. So move the bridge up to the north of Manhattan, and that'll work better, and it has. And so
Now, how did they have that kind of influence? They didn't run these organizations. They are not the city government.
That's absolutely
of any
right.
of these places. How do they get that influence
Well,
to do these really spectacular things?
I think that the board was a respected and connected institution that included people who had run these agencies. And today, 90 years later, my board includes the former governor of New Jersey and the former lieutenant governor and MTA CEO Dick Ravitch, the people who used to run the MTA and the Port Authority and the New York City Department of Transportation and other things are on my board. In fact, also, today, the current head of the Port Authority, the current chairman of Amtrak, the current head of the MTA are all former RPA board members.
Huh.
And so we have this relationship. So we're private citizens saying what we believe is the right thing to do, but we have the relationship and the connection to them. The other thing is that we've always been very influential with media, and the New York Times and other outlets have always have paid attention to what we say and given us that pulpit.
So in these long periods, 25 years, you're still working on the same things, or do they change?
They change, for sure. The first plan in the 1920s was all about building infrastructure to allow the region to breathe, to grow. The overcrowding conditions on the Lower East Side, as you know, were really intolerable. And so that plan was about building the limited access highways, the transit connections, and doing more community development in northern New Jersey, in Queens, and Nassau County.
But during that period, were there shifts, or did you stay to that agenda?
We put out this plan, and we were criticized by none other than Lewis Mumford, saying that the plan wouldn't do enough to decongest the region. And instead, what everybody missed was the extraordinary influence of the automobile. And within 25 years, people were moving out of cities at just an incredible rate. And so in the 1950s and the 1960s, RPA really turned around and said, our concern now is about making sure that the cities stay vital. We don't want there to be segregated, isolated populations left behind in parts of Brooklyn or Queens or the Bronx.
As the suburbs mushroom.
As the suburbs mushroom. So we said, look, it doesn't mean that everybody should stay in New York City. There should be development in Connecticut and New Jersey and other places, but it should be along where we have the transit infrastructure so that these are connected communities. So Stamford, Connecticut, White Plains in Westchester, Newark, New Jersey became places where we wanted to see more growth and opportunity, as opposed to, you know, the edge city kind of phenomenon.
So now let's fast forward.
Sure.
I assume you've been doing infrastructure.
Right.
Where does the fourth plan fit in all of this?
Well,
is it still infrastructure, or what is
it? It is, but it's so different. I mean, from 1950 to 2000, what we were doing was swimming against a very strong tide of suburbanization. And I came up into this field thinking that that would be what I would do my entire life, would be to fight against that. But sometime around the turn of the century, these trends changed. And as we know, young people said, hey, I don't want to live out in this sterile suburban environment mowing a lawn all day.
Sure.
I want to live in a vibrant city.
And there are no factories anymore.
There are no factories
in the
anymore.
suburbs.
The air is a lot cleaner. I can bike around. I can walk around.
And I can do things on my little gizmo.
Yes, exactly. And the gizmo is really important because people who are stuck in a car are completely unproductive. When you are stuck in traffic on Route 202 or 206 or 287, you are just, that is lost time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're traveling in transit, you can be highly productive still.
Sure.
It's still you can be socializing with your friends, you can be productive at work, you can be doing things. So the mindset is changed dramatically. Also, the retiring boomers are saying, wait a second, I'd rather live in an exciting, vibrant place where I can see people, I can get to restaurants, and I can get good health care and other things. So what we're seeing is people moving back into cities, and technology is aiding and supporting this. So now suddenly, as planners, we have to flip again. And I would say that this organization did it once in the 30s and 40s, and now we're doing it again. And this time what we're saying is, okay, so people want to move into these communities. How do we make sure that force is harnessed in positive and beneficial ways? How do we use this to try and make sure that we provide opportunity to everybody?
So is that one of the elements? Are there elements of this plan?
Absolutely.
Specific directions?
Absolutely. Now, traditionally, we've worked on transportation infrastructure, community development, and open space issues. And we still work in many ways in those different buckets. But what we're doing in each of them has changed dramatically. It used to be our concern on the environmental side was protecting our drinking water landsheds, the watersheds in the Hudson Valley. Today, with climate change, what we're really concerned about are the coastal communities that got walloped by Superstorm Sandy and will get hit again by the next storm. The 130,000 people who live in southeastern Queens in the Rockaways, where in 25, 30 years, under most scenarios, not just storms will be hitting them, but high tides will be causing trouble. We've been encouraging people to move to the water's edge, and now suddenly we've discovered some of them are in harm's way. So we still have environmental concerns, but it's much more about climate change. And also, again,
So
what do we do?
climate
Our
change
carbon
is
footprint.
one of the elements.
Climate change is going to be one of the elements, and it's going to mean a cleaner, more renewable energy supply and protecting those communities, the resilient, and creating more resilience in our communities. Community development is still one of them, but like I said, now it's about how do we provide the housing for the people who want to move into the cities.
And they're very different from the old days.
Absolutely, because the household composition is going to be a very different kind of thing.
And the demographics are different. People
Absolutely.
from India,
Right.
from China,
Right.
from Africa.
And how do we make sure that we knit together communities in a more holistic way? Because we don't want to have isolated. Of course, everybody's identity is important to them, but we grew in a very segregated and polarized way in the 20th century. So in the 21st century, we want to figure out how to create more diverse communities.
So item 1 is climate change, item 2 is the
Community
dealing with
development.
diversity and community development.
And by the way, on that, right now our region generates, historically, over 25 years, we've built about 60,000 residential units a year. When we look at the growth that we anticipate over the next 25 years, and we think about how are we going to provide affordable housing and diverse housing and choices for people, we need that 60,000 to become, we think about 90,000.
90,000 a year.
A year, a 50% increase in housing production. That's a very dramatic increase.
And where would you put this housing?
Well, of course, some of our legacy cities, our Newarks and our Bridgeports and other cities, they want to have that kind of growth, and they want to have a middle class come in, and we want to help them do it. But that won't last very long. There's also
That's the
gonna
old
be-
factory
that's the old
space.
factory space
And the old downtowns
Right.
and that sort of
All
thing.
of that would be very good. But New York City, a lot of people want to be in New York City, and we've seen this incredible growth in Brooklyn and in the waterfront, and now it's getting into Queens, and we've got to look at places like the Bronx, say. And the Bronx has an opportunity to build 4 new commuter railroad stations if we bring Metro North into Penn Station. And this is, again,
And
of
that's
course,
part of the plan. That's
and
part
so
of the
that's one of the
infrastructure piece.
recommendations we'll be supporting. And so, of course, what we look at is where's the infrastructure and the housing, and let's do these things together. And again, we're the only institution in this region that thinks across those silos and across the political boundaries, too, at the same time. So we don't care whether a job is on one side of the Hudson River or the other. What we want is to have...
And neither does the job holder.
Exactly. The job holder just wants access to that
To the
job.
job.
And what we want is to get that job to the people who need it the most.
Okay.
And then the third piece, again, is infrastructure. But as you've said, technology has changed the way we experience it. I remember as a little kid in the 1970s in New York when riding the subways was a pretty scary experience. We had a derailment of a train pretty much once a week. We had fires on the trains, doors wouldn't open, the graffiti and all this. We've gotten past that, and our system is now much, much improved. But when we look around the world at the other leading metropolitan regions, they have made investments in their systems. It's not, having the trains not derail or catch fire is not the benchmark that they're going for. And so what we need to do is elevate ours also.
So when you're elevating that, I know one piece of it Bob Yarrow was working on is across
Mhm.
City Tunnel,
Right.
like London.
Right.
So there's a global competition in this infrastructure piece, isn't there?
Well, we use competition to try and spur on.
But that's
folks.
what I'm getting
Yeah,
at
absolutely,
is that
yeah.
if you don't meet that challenge, that job, since
Goes
it's
somewhere.
digitized, can
That's
go to Sydney.
That's absolutely right. And in particular, the tunnel under the Hudson River. The Hudson River is the biggest divider in this region, in the Northeast, in the entire, mega region stretching from Boston to Washington. The tunnels under it, there are 2 tracks underneath it that are over 100 years old. They were flooded during Superstorm Sandy, and they've been repaired, but the repairs are just a Band-Aid. And what we know now is that sometime in the next decade or 2, those tunnels are going to need to be shut down for an extended period of time, at least a year, to do major repairs. Shutting those tunnels down
Shut down the region.
would shut down the region. New Jersey's economy, the most important industry for the state of New Jersey, is called commuting to New York City, and that would simply end. The entire Northeast economy relies on people being able to travel up and down this corridor, and if you take out that critical piece of it, you simply can't make it up with the
So
rest
this,
of the system.
you have to build a new tunnel?
Yes.
And
What we
that
need-
new tunnel will be built, and then you repair the old ones. Is that the way it would go?
Exactly. And then once we've repaired the old ones, we would have 4 tracks instead of 2 under the Hudson River, and that would give us the capacity for another generation's growth. Only one
Would that
generation.
include a high-speed rail?
No, it won't. To do high-speed rail, we'll need to come. That'll be the next generation's project. So this is. Now we've known for a long time that we needed to build this tunnel for the growth capacity. The danger now is that if we don't build it, we will lose the existing ones, and that is the kind of that would be such a
That's a
catastrophe.
doomsday
That's a doomsday scenario. That would show up on the national GDP charts in terms of depressing economic growth of the entire country. So we had the Undersecretary of the Department of Transportation here a month ago for a conference we did where we assembled the heads of the Port Authority and Amtrak and the MTA and the City
And
Department
this
of
is
Transportation.
before the plan is done, and you know
This
this is
is-
a critical
right,
element.
right.
So the plan doesn't wait until the document's
That's
completed.
absolutely right.
You're working on the plan as you do the plan.
And there's precedent for that because that whole George Washington Bridge story I talked about happened in the 1920s while the plan was being produced. The first plan was released in 1929. But in 1925, the RPA planners didn't decide to keep it secret. They went to the Port Authority and they said, you got to move this bridge. And I'd say that's exactly what we're doing today. So we are putting enormous emphasis in building these tunnels under the Hudson River and working with Amtrak and Congress and the city and the state and New Jersey Transit, because it's going to be an enormously expensive project. But when it gets built, and there's a model behind us here of the west side of Penn Station and Madison Square Garden and the
There'll
Hudson
be a new
Yards.
Penn Station.
We need to build a new Penn Station, Penn South, it'll be added to it.
Mhm.
The old Farley Post Office building will
It's
become a
gonna be
new
right
Amtrak.
here.
It's a beautiful building by McKim, and White, who designed the original Penn Station. And we'll have a new complex there. And this whole area behind us has been rezoned and is under construction now for the Hudson Yards. And it'll
Any
have-
room for that over there?
No, the tunnels need to come up. Also, you have the rest of the infrastructure over here. You have the subways that people are trying to get to and other systems.
So where does Madison Square Garden fit in? We won't go there.
Yeah, well, look, we think that it would be better to move the garden off that site. That the garden, while they did a renovation, someday they're going to need a really great new arena. And that when that happens, at the same time that the tunnel comes in, we can build a much better train station.
So in the Hudson Yards area.
Somewhere around here, there's a post office right there. You wonder whether that prime real estate is necessary for the post office to do its back.
Okay, now we've been talking about transportation on
Sure.
the ground,
Yes,
but we have airports.
absolutely.
And where's the plan stand with that piece?
We've done a lot of research on the airports. So today, Newark, LaGuardia, and Kennedy airports, we have a regional system where we have 3 airports all controlled by the Port Authority, and about 108, say, million people go through them every year, which is the same number, by the way, that go through Penn Station all by itself. But the airports, of course, are our global gateway. They are the connection to the rest of the world. And in particular, we anticipate over the next 25, 30 years to need another 50 million people to be able to go through those airports.
The same airports.
The same airports. So we looked at, should we build a new, what would they do in Asia? They'd probably build one in the middle of the harbor or
Well, we're
something
not gonna
like
do
that.
that.
Not gonna happen here. Should we try and expand airports outside the region? We have one in the Hudson Valley, others in Connecticut and in
And on the
Philadelphia.
island?
Doesn't really work. People need an airport that's close to where they're trying to get. Where they're trying to get is Manhattan, the center of the region.
So that means
So-
Newark and JFK.
Newark and Kennedy both need. Now, the first thing we need to do is a technology upgrade. We can get Congress and the federal government to help create this thing we call NextGen. I mean, it's a very scary thing that the technology in your and my iPhones and smartphones is greater than what we're using for air traffic control. That's absurd. So we need a technology upgrade. But after we do that, we're going to need to add runways at both Kennedy and Newark. Now, look, London's going through this too, trying to decide whether Heathrow or Gatwick or other things. Other great cities have to. This is going to be the future.
Well, Sydney's going through
And
this.
Sydney's going through this too. So cities have to figure out how to do that. And they're tough and they'll cost money and they'll take a long time. But the reason we enjoy the benefits and the quality of life and the prosperity we have today is because our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents made those investments once upon a time. So it's our
Made
turn to
those
step up.
decisions.
Yeah.
So what's the next element?
Well,
That for infrastructure.
that's in the
development.
infrastructure. And the final thing I would just say is that this is going to be the first plan that comes out. There are really a couple changes from prior plans. Again, climate change wasn't something we worried about
No.
back in the 20th century. We didn't even know about it. We didn't have technology. We didn't have to the same degree in terms of social media and the connectivity. And that creates capacity, everything from City Bike, the bike share programs that we have. It's wonderful. It's an old technology. Bicycles have been around for more than 100
Absolutely.
years. But by connecting it to the transponders and the digital technology, it suddenly enables it in a whole new way. Uber and CarShare, Airbnb, all of these things are about ways of adding capacity and more efficiency to the systems that we have. At the end of the day, there is a kind of old idea that stays with us, which is that what we have to do is really help those communities that have been suffering and struggling the most. It's about
this
creating
seems like a
dignity to
continuous
all.
story here.
That
From
is
the first
that is
plan
a continuous story. That's
through
right.
4 plans,
Right.
nearly 100 years.
Right.
You still have people not getting in and people left behind.
That's
Has
absolutely right.
there been a change in the kind of people or the locations or how are you grappling with this?
If anything, there's
issue?
been a change in that they're suffering more. The
Suffering
shocking
more.
thing-
Things are
that-
worse than they were.
that they're not participating in our economy. New York City's economy is doing extraordinarily well, but the pockets of poverty remain where they used to be. It's among the same populations that used to have it, and you can see they're locked out of educational opportunity. They struggle with all kinds of dysfunction and issues,
Well,
and they're
old ways
they're
of atten-
isolated.
Now, over that 100 years, the public schools have been it. You tell
Right.
me that's not working.
It's not
Are you
working
doing
in
inventions
these
for the public
communities.
school because there's a huge investment there. Training
Absolutely
more
right.
teachers, Teach America, all that, and it's still not working.
It's still
What
not
will
working.
work?
in
Do we
these-
have something new? A better idea?
Well, look, there was a landmark Supreme Court decision just the other day that said that affordable housing dollars need to be spent in ways that create more diverse communities. And I don't think this is new. I think we've known this for a long time.
So it's really
but
the
if you
diversity
warehouse
of the
poor
settlement.
people, I think that land
Then
use
it
patterns-
changes the schools.
Yeah, I think that you can try and put enormous amount of resources into schools, but if you've still got places where it's all poor people living and all rich people living, you're just not going to provide opportunity to those people. And that figuring out how to leaven communities, how to provide them with more, and I think that all children, I mean, our children, my children, are growing up in a more international and diverse world. And one of the worst things you could do for them would be to shut them out from seeing the way other people live and experiencing the full range of humanity. And so it's about providing dignity to all communities and all people, and about making sure that people meet and are introduced to and
So
live with and
education
work
is one way of dealing with
Absolutely.
this. Clearly, because jobs are mobile, so the jobs can go to the people where
That's
they
right.
couldn't in the past.
with. Right.
Neighborhoods are more diverse, more jobs come.
That's right.
So we've
Although
got that.
people, a lot of the jobs that you're looking for these communities don't have that kind of mobility. So providing more access to them is going to be critical. And that's, I think, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is identify the pockets that are cut out and figuring out ways to provide connection, whether it's you allow people to move into these other communities, or you give them better transit or educational links to those communities. You use technology to do this, and you just have to look at all the full range of options.
All right, last thing.
Okay.
You've been to Sydney.
Sure.
You've got all the same problems.
Yep. Yep.
We don't have an institution like RPA. Where do you think we should go?
You started by saying that RPA is a unique model, and it is. And I still am confounded by that. One of the easiest things to do is to create a civic model. It's much easier than creating a government model.
Yeah.
It doesn't take legislative action. All it takes is concerned citizens.
A lot of civic will, though.
And civic will. But what I experienced when I visited Sydney was to see that you had institutions, the universities, the business groups, and others that
Community
wanted
for
to.
Sydney.
Community for Sydney. All of those want to engage on these issues. It doesn't take. RPA's budget is $6 million a year. It's a drop in the bucket in
Yeah,
this
that's true.
economy. We're a small nonprofit. We don't have to do all the work, but what we can do is convene the thinkers and provide that civic forum for folks to address these issues. And I would encourage Sydney to be thinking along the same lines, whether an RPA model would make sense for Sydney.
Thank you.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure to talk to you,
It's
Ed,
good
as
to be on
always.
the RPA board.
It's nice
I
to
got a
have you
great
on
model.
the RPA board.
Thank you.
Thank you.